Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a campfire story that is absolutely dripping with suspense. We're talking about the Ozark Howler, but honestly, this isn't your standard monster hunt. It's an epic tale about human hubris, the terrifying infinity of nature, and what happens when we try to shove the vast wild unknown into a neat little rational box. Just picture yourself for a second. You're completely alone in the deep, dark woods. The sun's gone down, the temperature is totally dropped, and those shadows are getting uncomfortably long. What exactly would you do if you realized the darkness wasn't just empty space, but that it was actually staring right back at you? Seriously, what happens when you try to capture the reflection of a myth? Let's get right into the first act, focusing on the sheer hubris of our main character. Years after the old folks first started whispering these unsettling tales about the Howler, a man, known only as a seeker of truths, decided to venture out to a remote mountain ridge. Now here's the wild part. He didn't bring a rifle to hunt the beast, and he didn't even bring a lantern to spot it in the dark. He brought a mirror. His whole philosophy was this: to witness its form is to strip it of its power. He honestly believed that by catching this beast in a mirror, he could prove it obeyed the exact same laws of physics and optics that we do. It's the ultimate human ego trip, right? Thinking that if you can just classify a myth, you can conquer the wilderness itself. Moving into the sensory descent of our story, just imagine the atmosphere. The sun dips below the jagged spine of the mountain, throwing out these long, menacing shadows. Our seeker takes his spot on a cold, gray limestone shelf. He's completely exposed to the elements, just waiting for this myth to show up. And the silence on that ridge, it didn't just casually settle over the landscape. It was absolutely suffocating. It pressed against his ears like rising water. You can almost physically feel that claustrophobic, heavy pressure of the mountain just closing in all around him right before the terror actually strikes. Then, the sound hits, a jagged, silk-tearing scream. And this wasn't just some noise you hear from afar. It was a visceral, physical force. This sound literally vibrated in the guy's teeth and pulsed right in the hollow of his throat. But he didn't run, he didn't bolt for a door or hide. He actually stood his ground. As the brush in the thicket began to slowly, deliberately sway, two glowing coals appeared in the darkness. But what the seeker saw wasn't an animal. These glowing red eyes were just hovering in the air with absolutely zero discernible body behind them. It was literally as if the pitch-black darkness of the forest had just spontaneously sprouted eyes to better observe this tiny human intruder. So the seeker turns his mirror. He angles the glass directly toward the thicket, completely desperate to catch the beast's reflection. This is his big moment, right? The moment of truth, where he proves his grand theory that this terrifying thing exists in physical space and follows the exact same rules of reality as he does. But here is the massive, uncanny twist. The red light of the creature's gaze hit the glass, and there was no beast. The mirror didn't show some cat-like nightmare or a giant black-furred monster. It only showed the ancient oaks, the tangled briars, and the massive, yawning mouth of the valley behind him. And that brings us to the uncanny revelation. The physical space where that beast stood was actually a hole in the reflection. It was a literal void that the silvered glass simply refused to acknowledge. His mirror, this perfect little tool of human science and rationality, was totally, utterly useless against something that defied the physical world. To really grasp the horror of this, we've got to talk about the philosophy of the uncanny. It's that deeply unsettling, skin-crawling experience of realizing you aren't just facing a physical danger, but a total disruption of reality itself. Holding that mirror, the seeker finally, terrifyingly understood the truth the old folks had been warning everyone about. The Howler was never just an animal prowling in the woods. It was the wood's own consciousness. It was literally the mountain's way of looking back at him. As that howl erupted a third time, so incredibly close that it stirred the hair on the back of his neck, he realized his fatal error. You cannot reflect what is infinite, and you definitely cannot witness a force that has already decided you're just part of the scenery. Let's wrap up this story and see where it fits into our broader mythology. We'll fast forward to the eerie aftermath as the sun finally starts to rise on that empty ridge. When the morning light broke, the seeker was entirely gone. All that was left on that cold limestone shelf was his mirror, shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces, and every single shard held a tiny, perfect reflection of the empty ridge. The man who thought himself so infinitely wise had been completely erased, and that fragile, vast Ozark silence was made perfectly whole again. So, zooming out a bit, what's really fascinating is how this Ozark epic completely flips classic American folklore on its head. Usually, our tall tales are all about man conquering nature, right? Think of Pickersbill literally wrestling a tornado and winning. But this story is the exact opposite. It's a dark tale of nature consuming man. It perfectly illustrates the absolute futility of trying to rationalize and conquer the wild. When you break down the local lore, there's a pretty clear hierarchy. You've got your physical cryptids, your standard black-furred beasts that act as biological anomalies. Then you have spectral entities, like the ghosts of early settlers, which are basically historical echoes. But the Ozark Howler? It sits in a terrifying category of its own, an elemental consciousness. It isn't just a monster to be hunted down. It represents an elemental force that completely shatters the illusions of human superiority. Which leaves us with a pretty chilling final thought to chew on. The next time you step into the deep woods and you feel that heavy, oppressive silence, ask yourself, are you observing wilderness, or has the vast, totally unsympathetic consciousness of the natural world already decided you're just part of the scenery? Keep questioning what you see in the mirror.